None to the state.
None from the defense.
All right, thank you. We will now begin the trial.
Thank you, Your Honor. May it please the court. What happened to Terry Lewis on January 17th of 2019 was no accident. She was burned on 38% of her body, primarily the front of her body, concentrated to the right side. Her face, her neck, her hair was charred. These were third-degree burns. Third-degree burns all over her body, down to her legs, all over the front of her legs, that left her bedridden for almost 10 months before she finally succumbed to the complications from these burns. She had breathed in fire. Now, the actions before and after this event of her husband of 20 years, Craig Lewis, were not those of a loving and caring husband. They were those of a murderer. You're going to hear that rather than call 911, Craig paraded Terry around the house, who was dying from burns, fighting for her life, their bloody footprints all through the house, put clean clothes on her, cleaned himself up before going to the ER. The nurse at the ER cuts the clothes off of Terry because the burns are so bad. Clothes are clean, they're not burned at all. In fact, nobody ever finds burned up clothes. Nobody finds the clothes that Terry was apparently in when she, according to Craig, caught herself on fire. You're also going to hear that once the decision was made to airlift Terry to the Augusta Burn Center due to the extent of her burn injuries, Craig left the ER. He left. And when police made contact with him at 273 Wade Hampton Drive, their shared residence, he was spraying off the carport. He was spraying off what appeared to be fire debris on the carport. A couch had been removed from the living room. A couch that was later found burned up on the side of the road of Risher Mountain Road. Craig had another residence too. That was located off of Kansas City Road. And what law enforcement found there the next day was a trailer that appeared to have cotton, that appeared to be the same sort of stuffing that came from the couch, and burn pits, smoking burn pits. Now, you're going to hear from a number of witnesses in this case, and the evidence is going to come from the witness stand. What I say and what Ms. Bright Matthews say, it's not evidence. And what you must do is base your decision on what you hear in the courtroom, the evidence that is presented to you through exhibits, testimony, pictures. The state bears the burden of proof in this case, and I must prove to you beyond a reasonable doubt that Mr. Lewis committed these crimes, murder and arson first. I prove that to you through the introduction of evidence. Evidence beyond a reasonable doubt is evidence that leaves you firmly convinced of the defendant's guilt. You must be firmly convinced. Now, your job as jurors is to determine the facts of the case. You get to decide who's credible, what really happened, and then, of course, Judge Dukes is the judge on the law. And at the end of all of the evidence, he's going to instruct you on that law. Now, I do want to point out that this is a circumstantial case. There is nobody that witnessed this event, which is fairly typical in domestic homicide, because domestic violence occurs behind closed doors. But Leanne Kellum Kroenke, Terry Lewis's daughter, who's in the gallery today, is going to tell you what she observed the night before. The night before, Craig says his wife set herself on fire. Set herself on fire with the fireplace that she's been working for 25 years. Terry Lewis has lived in the same house with the same wood-burning fireplace for 25 years, has probably lit hundreds of fires without incident. Until the day after, Leanne witnesses a big fight between the two of them. The law makes no distinction between circumstantial and direct evidence, and that's something that the judge is going to tell you more about later on in the case. But to the extent that we rely on circumstantial evidence, it must all point conclusively to Craig Lewis. And I think at the end of this case, you're going to find that it does. At the end of this case, I'm going to ask you to find Mr. Lewis guilty of murder and arson first, because this was no accident. He's going to tell you it was an accident that she lit herself on fire, but the evidence in the scene says otherwise. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
May it please the court.
Yes, ma'am. Please proceed.
In this court, probably, maybe, we think it happened this way, doesn't cut it. Each of you took a solemn oath. Each of you understand that the Constitution affords my client, Craig Lewis, a right to be judged by his peers. Peers like you. Peers who've been to the hospital. Peers who know about Walterboro. Peers who understand human nature. Peers who've had dealings with law enforcement. Peers who understand being accused just because. And peers who understand there are motives that people have all the time. You took a solemn oath to uphold our Constitution. Now, the state is right. They have a burden. And the judge is going to explain that burden. He's going to give you the law, and only he is the arbiter of the law. You have to judge the facts, or the lack of facts in this case. Now, what will you hear? When you look at all the charges, we're here because Craig Lewis is charged with arson, means he set the fire. Craig Lewis is charged with murder, and the judge will explain to you the elements that they have to show for murder. I'm going to tell you what you will hear. You will hear that a fire occurred on Wade Hampton Avenue on January 17th, 2019, and that it occurred as a result of Terry Lewis trying to start a fire in her wood-burning stove. As jurors, you come in here, you know where Wade Hampton Avenue is, over there near I still call it John C. Calhoun, but the private school over there off of Academy Road, which is behind the hospital. It's not very far from the hospital. You have to use your common sense throughout this trial. Wade Hampton Avenue is not far from Colleton Prep. And Colleton Prep certainly is not far from our hospital. So there's a big deal about not calling 911. If your loved one is hurt, you take them straight there if you're closer to the hospital. You will hear that at 12:14 on January 17th, Craig rushed his wife into the ER in a wheelchair. They were sent to room 19. Craig went to park the truck and returned to room 19 to wait with his wife. You will hear from the hospital representatives and what the report says. It's written that he signed his wife in at 12:21. The admit time on the records you will hear is at 12:12. You will also hear that eventually a nurse came and got an explanation from Terry Lewis as to what happened. You will hear that she was able to talk. You will hear that she was alert. You will hear that she was cooperative. You will hear that she was in severe pain. You will also hear that the nurse received a triage information from Terry Lewis. I was trying to light the stove with lighter fluid, and the flyer blew back on me. That wasn't Craig's words, that was the patient's word. You will hear that she was also checked. You will hear from the nurse that it also explained that she questioned about her social environment. Are you okay? Are you worried? Those are typical. You have to use your common sense here. When they put that notation in your chart, it's for a reason. To make sure that you're comfortable. You will hear that Craig Lewis was in the room. Then you will hear the second part. Tests were run on Terry. The lab tests were done. They were returned at 12:57. Mind you, 12:12 is when she was admitted. You will hear that the doctor came in. The doctor goes through a physical examination of Miss Lewis, and the doctor says the same thing except for one thing. He checked her mouth. He checked her extremities. He checked her vitals. That's what you'll see the report on. We've subpoenaed the doctor to be here. He's going to tell you that Terry Lewis explained to him that she was trying to light the fire with lighter fluid, and the fire came back on her. You will hear that Craig Lewis stayed when the doctor said, I noticed some shortness of breath on the report. He will tell you, and it's written in his report, that he counseled with Terry and with Craig about relieving of pain because she was in excruciating pain, and with his concern of her airway because he noticed that there was a little soot in her mouth and that she was getting shortness of breath. The report says SOB, shortness of breath. And as a result of that, the doctor then, at 12:27, the report clearly shows that the doctor counseled and he performed an intubation. He also says, I counseled the patient, she consents, and her husband consents also. So why are we here? The doctor then explains, and you will hear his testimony, that because of the severity of injuries, the burns, and the intubation, he was going to find a room for Terry, not at the Augusta. He tried at the Augusta Burn Center. She was going to be sent to the burn unit at the Augusta Hospital, but after they waited in the hospital for over an hour to get the transfer, they had no beds. They received a call back. Miss Bishop, the nurse, is going to come. They received a call back. There was no bed in Augusta, so Craig stayed there with his wife. Then they found a bed, but it was only in Atlanta at their burn unit. When they first made the call to Augusta Burn Unit, Craig called Leanne. He called Leanne and said, hey, you need to get here. She works because they're about to send you. He told her what happened and said, your mom burnt herself. She works in North Charleston, so she had to come here. Craig waited and waited. He, for a little while, called Leanne again. Said, where are you? She finally got there, Craig's still at the hospital. Here's where the problem comes in. Leanne's in the room. Craig then leaves to go to the house because he's worried about getting his things together so that he can go to Atlanta with his wife. Leanne then tells the nurse something happened. I don't agree with the way her burns are, and I don't agree with what she said and how it happens. I believe he burnt her. Now you're going to hear something. My client was 27 years old back in 2006 when he married Leanne's mama. Leanne's mama was 49. When this occurred, she was 63 years old. We're only here to speak the truth, and we hope the state does too, because you need the full picture. You will hear from Dr. Rinker about how Leanne's mom had all of her adult life was a severe bipolar. You will also hear that her burns were not 3rd degree all over her body. Her burns were only 3rd degree down on her leg. They were 2nd degree above. I'll get the doctor to explain the difference in the two. You will also hear that not only did she have that, she had severe tremors and shakes of her arms. You will also hear from Dr. Rinken that she was a breast cancer survivor. And she had gone through, she had a double mastectomy, had gone through radiation and chemotherapy. You will also hear that she had TIAs, mini strokes. You will also hear that there was some concern of dementia. You need to have the whole picture. After 3 hours at the hospital, and after Leanne got to the hospital, Craig then left. And that's when everything ensued. I'm not sure what the big deal of making sure that his wife is properly clothed before she goes to the hospital. But I can't imagine anybody taking someone to the hospital with no clothes. Craig left the hospital to go get ready to follow and get to the hospital in Atlanta. While he was there, 2 deputies walked in. He let them in the house. After they questioned him, they told him he could go. The officers walked with him out. He locked his door. He got in his truck. And as he got in his truck, 8 to 10, I'm not sure, you're going to have to count yourself, 8 to 10 deputies arrived behind his truck, and one who had not questioned him said, he's not going anywhere. Get him out of the truck. A scuffle ensued. Keys were yanked. Craig ended up with a big bruise on his face and ended up in jail. And we're here 5 years later. You will hear what the officers did to investigate. Since this is so serious, you will also hear the statements they took, the evidence they took, and what they did with the evidence that they took. The CDV they've talked about, that charge too, but dropped. The burden of proof is on the state. Here's what you will not hear and see in this trial. You will not see a video of Craig bringing Terry in the hospital, even though the state has the burden, and you know 2019, there was video. You will not hear the dispatch tape recording or log or transcript of who called in the 911 tape, and you will not hear what was said by our audio recording. No evidence was preserved. The written report of the video of the first deputies on the scene, you won't see that either. The first deputies did not write a report. You won't even see a dash cam or a body cam. 2019 Colleton County Sheriff's Department did not, out of 10 officers at the scene, none of them have produced a body cam or dash cam. The 9 to 11 officers at the scene, not one recording, even with their cell phone. You will not hear a consistent story from any of the officers of how Craig went from talking to them inside the house, explaining what happened, to him getting into the car and preparing to go to the burn unit. You will hear how Captain Stallings responded and gave the command to take him down. Craig hadn't gotten up since that command. You will hear how Terry died 10 months later, and Craig couldn't even be around his wife on these allegations that they cannot prove. You will not see all of the evidence collected. You will not see a SLED report testing the blanket that he used to try to smother the fire. You will not see SLED report or testing on the couch to see if there was accelerant on the couch. You will not see evidence that the state's going to present as it relates to the lighter fluid can. You will see the lighter fluid can, but they never tested it. They have no evidence that Craig's fingerprints are on it. You will not see a test for accelerant on Terry Lewis's body. You will hear of Officer Tozier going to the hospital and looking at Terry's feet. And she's wrapped, and she does not do anything to swab to make sure there's any accelerant on her body. You will not hear from the fire department in this case. So I asked the question earlier, if you like drama shows where they go through all the meticulous evidence, you won't get that. This is a probably maybe. I think this is how it happened. Case. You will not hear even about the testing of the wood that was in the fireplace. 5 hours later, when they went to the house, only thing they could do was touch the inside of the fireplace. Yet, every officer up there was experienced, and they knew that the burden one day would rest with them. Let's talk about Terry's care. She went to the burn unit. She stayed there for 2 months unconscious, intubated. She stayed at the Augusta Rehab Center after she left Atlanta for 4 weeks. She was unable to walk when she left. You will hear that she then was transferred to Charleston for occupational therapy and rehab. She was doing well for 2 months, starting to feed herself, trying to walk around with a walker. Then she had to go back to Augusta, the Augusta Center, in July to have a surgery on her neck. It's called a neck drop surgery. The doctor will explain that. Then she went to Trident and to the Augusta Center. You will hear in the evidence that she fell 2 times out of bed, hurting her elbow. You will hear also that she received a contusion on her lung. Then you will hear that she was recovering from burns but developed a gaping bed sore. You will hear that after that, she lost her will to live. I believe the notes from the doctor says, lost her will to live. Ladies and gentlemen, This is a very serious case. This is both Terry Lewis's and Craig Lewis's day for you as the jury to weigh the state's case and bring back a verdict which speaks the truth. Oftentimes I wonder, without these frivolous allegations of probably, maybe, I think this is how it happened, whether or not Terry's will would have changed there at the end. She died. The state also has to prove that the cause of her death was in reference to this fire. They cannot meet that burden, but yet here we are anyway. All I ask is on behalf of Craig and Terry, I ask that you remember your solemn oath and give both of them justice. Thank you. May she rest in peace.